On Valentine's Day of 1975, the body of what is presumed to be a teenage boy, was found hanging from a tree in rural Louisiana. Although he left a letter behind, with most of it addressed to his parents, in this letter he stated he wanted to remain unidentified. And it seems he may get his wish because it's half a century later and still no one knows his actual identity. Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If this video seems a little bit familiar, I promise you are not experiencing any form of deja vu, and this is not a Mandela effect. I did cover this case a few months ago, and I let everybody know in my community tab that I did end up taking the video down because it was upsetting YouTube a little bit because of the sensitive subject matter. I think that I genuinely could have kept that original video up, but I decided to just take it down because I kept getting some emails from YouTube, and I don't think there was any person watching my video and picking up on it. I think it was just their AI and it triggered their system in some way. But I just decided to rework my script and wait until December when I do Docember and cover the case again fresh. For everybody that wanted me to cover this case again, that is exactly what we are doing today. Before we get into the case, today's video is sponsored, and it is sponsored by Factor. What is Factor? Factor is a food subscription service that delivers fresh, never frozen, chef-crafted meals to your door, ready in just 2 minutes in the microwave. Dietitian approved and designed for your wellness goals. Factor removes the stress of cooking, planning, and cleanup so you can stay focused on those goals. Enjoy 100+ weekly options from meals and salads to breakfast shakes and more, crafted for great taste and nutrition. You can choose from plans like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, Vegan and Veggie, and more. One of my favorite aspects of the brand is that Factor meals are made without refined seed oils, refined sugars, or artificial colors or sweeteners. They've also banned more than 175 ingredients, prioritizing nutrient-dense foods that support long-lasting energy, strength, and overall wellness. Eating better does not need to be stressful. We have enough to be stressed about. This brand truly takes the guesswork out of clean eating. I've worked with them on and off for this entire year, and that's because I genuinely enjoy their meals. My favorites that I tried this year have to be their chicken Florentine and their ginger teriyaki salmon. My favorite drink by far is their apple beet ginger juice, which I've talked about before. Factor is owned by HelloFresh, who also owns Green Chef, and I love them all. I use them all, but Factor definitely stole my heart this year. If you want to try Factor yourself, you can head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code gabulosisfb50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code gabulosisfb50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for an entire year. Thank you, Factor, for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get back to the regular program. This is the case of Plaquemines Parish John Doe, also known as Belle Chase John Doe. Today's case takes place in the Naomi neighborhood in Belle Chase, an unincorporated community and census-designated place in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, a community that lies on the west bank of the Mississippi River. On February 14th, Valentine's Day of 1975, at about 11:30 p.m., a couple was driving through a rural wooded farm road between Highway 23 and the Mississippi River when they spotted something white hanging in a tree that caught their eye. They had not seen this when they passed the area about 6 hours earlier. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was the body of a teenage boy. Plaquemines Parish authorities took it over from there. The boy was hanging by his neck from one of the tree's limbs, suspended by a bedsheet. The tree was a persimmon tree. There was never a belief that his life was taken by another individual. As Detective Dominic Verdi, an investigator with the Plaquemines Parish Sheriff's Office, stated, moss found on his clothing matched that on the tree, suggesting he had climbed it to hang the sheet. The boy was described as fuzzy-faced by Bob Ussery of the Times-Picayune. He was Caucasian, had brunette hair and brown eyes. He stood at about 6 feet tall and weighed approximately 160 pounds. One noted physical characteristic of his was his upper top top teeth slightly protruded outward. The sketch of the teenager on the screen was created by New Orleans police detective Bob Burris. He was dressed in a long-sleeve Puritan-style shirt with maroon designs on a yellow background, blue trousers, a brown belt, and mismatched socks, one gray and one dark blue. No shoes were found on him or anywhere near the scene. Inside the trousers, investigators discovered a cleaning tag marked DD44 and a comb. These were the only personal items found on his body. This teenager, though, didn't leave this earth without leaving behind a letter. Beside the tree, they located a glass jar filled with 4 pieces of paper. These 4 papers were his goodbye to the world. This letter, to me, highlighted a few things. 1, it was apparent that he had an interest in philosophy and how the brain works and why it works that way. 2, he was definitely struggling due to what was going on in his own brain. 3, it seems he truly had reached a point where he felt this was his only option, his only way out, which is heartbreaking. This letter also points to this being an act done by his own hands, that no one else was responsible for his life ending. Now, the notes are a little all over the place, as you would expect from someone preparing to end their life. Madison Trammell posted an article regarding this case on medium.com, and she did a great job hunting down original articles and was able to put together what they assume is the intended order of the papers that he left behind. It seems that it starts by addressing his parents, stating, "Mom and Dad, I feel I have acted very methodically and coolly in my actions and my words. It is best if I cease to live quietly than risk that later I will break and shatter by violence or linger years under care. I never did develop into a real person, and I cannot tolerate the false and empty existence I have created. I implore you to see a psychiatrist in order that you might understand my death and my life. Ask thoroughly about what I was, and you will see that it is not tragic that I am gone, but more natural than if I continued." The next part is addressed to authorities, and it states, "Police, you are bound to preserve domestic peace and order. If you pursue who I was and spend hundreds of dollars, you will accomplish little. There are no legal consequences of my death or any kind of entanglements. All that can happen is that you will shatter the domestic peace and order of 2 innocent lives. Do not deprive them of the hope that their missing son will return. Let me be. Let it be as if I wasn't ever here. Simply cremate me as John Doe." Another part of the letter is titled, "Why You Should Not Feel Responsible." And it reads, "I was born with a definite pervasive melancholy. My brain always worked at cross purposes to my real development. I refused to express any emotions or deal with people on a social basis. In effect, I refused to accept that I was an animal and that I needed social ties. What frustrated me most in the last year was that I had built no ties to family or friends. There was nothing of lasting worth or value. I led a detached existence, and I was a parody of a person, literally and figuratively. I didn't tell jokes. I was a joke." He then references Emil Durkheim, who, according to this teenage boy, defined the act of one taking their own life as an inwardly directed form of homicidal feelings toward another person. Now, Emil Durkheim, who I knew very little about before researching for this case, was a French sociologist who lived between the years of 1858 and 1917. He is considered to be one of the founding fathers of sociology, believing that society is a complex system whose parts work together to promote stability and social order. He highlighted the significance of social facts, which are external patterns of behavior, values, and norms that influence and regulate individual actions. One of his most famous works was a book released in 1897 titled Suicide, a Study in Sociology. In this book, he analyzes the different types of ways that one can take their life and links them to levels of social integration and regulation. This was one of the first major sociological studies to use statistical methods. If I had to guess, I would say that the John Doe that we are talking about today read this book. In the John Doe's letter, he goes on to say, "I am a bomb of frustration and should never marry or have children. It is safest to diffuse the bomb harmlessly now. I do not want to bother with being a reformed and cured person limping through life. I am this self-centered." On the screen is the only part of the note that actually still exists today. It reads, "I have wanted to do this for over a year. I am not sad or see this as tragic. I feel a release. This is the only way I know to attain harmony. I was a withdrawn baby who became an unpleasant, withdrawn person. I have convinced myself and others that I am not capable of being an asset to society. I am no longer interested in the world and know that it is not interested in me. When you stop growing, you are dead. I stopped growing long ago. On a separate piece of scrap paper, unlike the other papers that were full, complete pieces of paper, so it seems like he wrote this part last minute, he adds, Mom and Dad, you have provided me excellent advantages and privileges and experiences. I have really led more of my life than many others have and this part is illegible. I am extremely grateful for all of your sacrifices, time, and support. I am now repaying you with an arrogant act. In this light, I do see it as criminal. I can only hope that you see that it was me who caused it. Although this John Doe wanted to remain a John Doe, authorities believed his parents deserved to know what happened to their son. Deputy Dominic Verdi was the lead officer assigned to handling this case within the parish. Following the discovery of the body, an autopsy was conducted by Dr. Frank Minyard, the parish coroner at the time. However, Dr. Minyard was a gynecologist by training and lacked formal forensic pathology credentials, which raised questions about the thoroughness and accuracy of the examination. In an effort to identify the deceased, the John Doe's fingerprints were sent to authorities in Washington, D.C. for comparison against national databases. Despite these efforts, no matches were found, and his identity remained unknown. This John Doe, later known as Plaquemines Parish John Doe or Bellchase John Doe, these names were given to him years later, was embalmed and placed in a funeral home located in Algiers, Louisiana, where his body was made available for public viewing in hopes that someone might recognize him. Authorities and local officials were determined to identify the young man, and the case quickly drew national attention. A widespread search for his identity was launched, with media coverage reaching families across the United States. As a result, more than 300 families traveled to Plaquemines Parish, each wishing, often with a mix of dread and desperate hope, that the John Doe might be their missing loved one. Despite the large number of visitors and extensive efforts to make this case known, none of the families could identify him, and no concrete leads emerged. The mystery surrounding who he was, where he came from, and what led him to that rural road remained painfully unresolved. The family of Charles Wallace Jr. made the trip from Tennessee to see if the John Doe could be Charles. In 1974, Charles was 19 years old and had been staying at a home in Memphis that helped teenagers struggling with drug dependency get clean and on a better path in life. He had vanished from the home randomly one day in 1974 and was never seen again. Dental records between the John Doe and Charles were compared, and it seemed that they were very similar, but Charles's mom was insistent that the unidentified teenager was not her son. But incredible news though, and this has happened since I covered this case originally, but we finally know what happened to Charles, and he's finally been reunited with his family. A partial skeleton of a man was found in a field near Route 79 in Lee County, Arkansas back in 1977. His cause of death is still undetermined to this day, but the remains were identified as belonging to Charles in September of this year by Othram. By June 12th of 1975, authorities believed that it was time to lay Plaquemines Parish John Doe to rest. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Woodlawn Park Memorial Cemetery. After being put in the ground, Deputy Verdi feared that they would never identify him and find his parents. So where is this case today? Well, it seems that the main ones who still care about identifying this teenager are people online, mostly on forums like WebSleuth or Reddit. I would say, though, mostly WebSleuth for this one because there are dozens of pages of people sharing what they've been able to locate, hoping to piece together everything and give this John Doe his name back. The page on WebSleuth for this John Doe was created back in 2005. 20 years ago. Since this John Doe was buried in an unmarked grave, the location of his grave was a mystery for a long time, but people on WebSleuth were actually able to track down funeral records showing where his plot was. People from WebSleuth reached out to the funeral home and understandably, they will not release the exact location of where he is buried. They'll only give that information to law enforcement. When people reached out to law enforcement, they didn't seem interested in attempting to exhume his remains and identify him through DNA testing. So this didn't really go anywhere. If he was a victim of homicide, then possibly they may have a different opinion, but they were pretty insistent that this is not something that they were going to focus on anytime soon. Since authorities are not making his identification a priority, people have come up with theories as to who he could have been in life. One of the main people that some believe this John Doe could be is Baynard Cousins. If you look into this John Doe online, you will see this person's name come up a lot. Baynard William Cousins was 22 years old when he vanished from Virginia Beach, Virginia on February 1st of 1975. He was an ecology activist who was fluent in Spanish. His parents were out of town at the time, and when they returned, they found a note from him that told them not to worry about him. Baynard stood around 6'2" or 6'3" and weighed about 160 pounds, so quite close to the John Doe. He had brunette hair, hazel eyes, but he wore glasses and had a cross-shaped scar on one of his fingers, which neither of these were noted with the John Doe. Plaquemines Parish John Doe didn't have any glasses with him, and no one recorded him having a scar on any of his fingers. Now, I personally feel like comparing the handwriting of the note left behind from Baynard and the note that we have left from the 4 that came from the jar with this John Doe case, that might get us somewhere, but I was not able to personally find any information online as to whether these handwritings were ever compared. Another person people have considered this John Doe to possibly be is Perry Otto Corlew. Perry was 17 years old when on March 15th of 1974, he crashed a green 1971 Buick Skylark outside Rialto Theater in Grayling, Michigan. This car was not his though. It was one he was in the process of buying. It was a hit and run, and when he hit the other vehicle, he did not stop. He kept driving, and they located the Buick about 15 miles south of Grayling along I-75. The vehicle was found with the engine still on, the lights still on, the driver's side door open, but yet there were no footprints in the snow around the car, and Perry has never been seen since. According to investigators, Perry's dental records were lost on their way to be compared to the John Doe's. Perry, I do have to say, also wore glasses, and as we discussed before, no glasses were found near this John Doe. That doesn't automatically mean he didn't wear glasses, though, because he was also found without shoes. Nothing else, though, has come from the possibility of Plaquemines Parish John Doe being either of these missing individuals. Of course, there is always the possibility that this John Doe could be somebody who is not even in a public missing persons database. He could be someone whose parents always believed that he left home willingly, has been living out his life somewhere all of these years, and just doesn't want to be found. Both his parents could be deceased by now, or possibly his parents did try to look for him and notified their local authorities about his disappearance, and law enforcement told them that he was a runaway and didn't help them. We really don't know. Plaquemines Parish John Doe took his life in 1975. I highly doubt he ever thought leaving this earth the way that he did would result in him becoming a mystery of the internet 50 years down the line. Other than his identity, people online have dove into why he possibly took his life, what some of the catalysts could have been. Some consider possibly he was a sociopath that felt disconnected from society as a whole, that maybe he was struggling with his sexuality at the time and felt like he couldn't be himself. Some have floated around the idea that he could have been on the autism spectrum during a time when it was so misunderstood. The list goes on. In my opinion, we can sit and talk all day about what we think he was going through mentally, but the truth is they are simply theories. Yes, they can give us a better understanding of why he did what he did, but unless he's identified and we discover more about him as a person from those who knew him, everything is just speculation. I will say, though, that based on the fact he seemed to care about his parents and how they would feel about him taking his life, I do doubt that he was a sociopath. But of course, though, I am not a psychiatrist, and I do feel for those who struggle greatly dealing with sociopathy. I think what we can gather from his letter is that, yes, there could be many reasons why he felt so detached from his life, but the bottom line is that he did. and that resulted in him ending his life. Where he came from and how he got to that remote area is completely unknown. Had he hitchhiked and then walked to that rural area from the highway? Possibly. If so, no one has ever come forward, though, stating that they gave him a ride. Also, why didn't he have any shoes on? Madison Trammell made a good point in her write-up and stated that the area he was found in was a bit swampy. Possibly his shoes fell off during death throes, when the body would have been erratically moving while he was dying. They could have fell off, landed in the swampy water below, sunk, and were simply never located. If they were located by some random person or people eventually, they possibly were never even connected to this case. I have to agree that that theory makes the most sense to me as well. I think it's also a good idea to ask the public if anyone knew of someone who went to Mardi Gras in 1975 and never returned. Mardi Gras in New Orleans, Louisiana, about 65 miles northwest of where the teenager was found, fell on February 11th of that year. Possibly he attended, or possibly it's just a coincidence, the two events, him taking his own life and the celebration, occurred so close together. One eerie part about this entire case is that the couple that found him didn't see him the first time that they drove back that area, which means that he made his way to that tree to take his life in the time between when they drove that road the first time and came back that way later on. Based on what I could find online, it also seems that most of the files for this John Doe were lost due to hurricanes. One report stated that it was a hurricane that came through in the 1990s, and another stated that it was due to Hurricane Katrina. If you have any information regarding the identity of Plaquemines Parish John Doe, you are urged to contact the Plaquemines Parish Sheriff's Office at 504-564-2525. I think one of the strangest aspects of this case, and many agree online, is the fact that he wanted to remain a John Doe, but did address part of his letter to his parents. It seems possibly he did this just so his parents would have some answers if he was identified. None of us can say for certain, but considering this was 1975, there is a strong possibility his parents are deceased by now and went the entire rest of their lives never knowing what happened to their son. Maybe he did leave a note behind for them, telling them that he was simply leaving and starting a new life somewhere, and they never thought to report him missing because they believed that he was fine and this was his choice. I would love to report back to everyone that he's being exhumed and they're going through with DNA testing, but like I stated before, this is not something that they are currently focusing on. This story overall is a very sad one. I want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about the case of Plaquemines Parish John Doe. And of course, 2 times thank you to all of the people who watched my first video and came back again and are watching this one. If you have never looked into this case online, there are a lot of people that have differing opinions. Some people think that we should talk about this case more and hopefully find out who his parents were, and if they're not here anymore, maybe he has siblings or cousins or people who cared about him. I am almost certain that there is someone still walking this earth who cared about him. There are other people, though, that feel like we shouldn't talk about this case because he did want to remain unidentified and anonymous and for his name to never be found out. I'm very much in the middle because I do want to respect him and his wishes. But at the same time, as someone who has talked to so many family members and friends of people who have gone missing, not knowing what happened to your loved one will genuinely take years off of your life because it will stress you out so much. It will add so much sadness and just confusion to your everyday life. It is very hard to function at times for people who are missing a loved one for decades. I really do believe that something like genetic genealogy could find out this teenage boy's identity, but like I said multiple times, unfortunately, they are not focused on that right now. We have officially entered December, though, here on my channel. If you don't know what that is, that's a series that I do every single December where I cover cases of John and Jane Does. But in the world of John and Jane Doe cases, there has been an incredible update in a Jane Doe case, a double Jane Doe case that I covered a few months ago, and that is the case of Peaches, Jane Doe, and her baby girl. If you want to watch the entire video, I will have it linked down below in the description of this video. But Peaches was identified as Tanya Jackson, and her daughter, only 2 years old when her life was taken, was identified as Tatiana Dykes. But the news broke on the 5th, and a man named Andrew Dykes, who is the father of Tatiana Dykes, a 66-year-old man today, was charged with murder in connection to this case. I wanted to update you all here. I probably will also put it in my community tab, but I wanted to let you all know in case you did not see that update. And we were all kind of waiting for an update, and a lot of us were wondering where Tatiana's father was and thinking that maybe he was involved. So we finally have an update, and I hope truly that justice is served in this case. If there are any cases that you possibly want me to cover here on my channel, make sure to send those requests over to gabulosiscaserequests@gmail.com. I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day. Wherever you are, stay safe like always, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.